First media-related segment of the day has to do with the Washington Post. Jeff Bezos tweets out, "I shared this note with the Washington Post team this morning." That'd be yesterday. "I'm writing to let you know about a change coming to our opinion pages. We're going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars, personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others." Yeah, there's a real shortage of defense of free markets in the American press. You know, it's about time somebody stand up for free markets in America.
Commies.
Yeah, really, really underrepresented view. Pretty amazing. There was a time when a newspaper...
I am so sick of Stephanie Rule's socialist propaganda.
Yeah, right, exactly. Exactly, that indoctrination. There was a time when a newspaper, especially one that was a local monopoly, might have seen it as a service to bring to the reader's doorstep every morning a broad-based opinion section that sought to cover all views. Today, the internet does that job. I am of America and for America, and proud to be so. Our country did not get here by being typical, and a big part of America's success has been freedom in the economic realm and everywhere else. Freedom is ethical. It minimizes coercion, and practical. It drives creativity, invention, and prosperity. I offered David Shipley, whom I greatly admire, that's their head editor, the opportunity to lead this new chapter. I suggested to him that if the answer wasn't hell yes, then it had to be no.
Also, I asked how he felt about my personal slogan, "Death to Superman."
Yeah, right. Yeah, that is billionaire speak for maybe you should get the fuck out. Right? I mean, that's basically what he's saying. I suggested to him that if his answer wasn't hell yes, it had to be no. After careful consideration, David decided to step away. This is a significant shift. It won't be easy, and it will require 100% commitment. I respect his decision. We'll be searching for a new opinion editor to own this new direction. I mean, I don't know. Have you thought of Paul Ryan? What's he doing nowadays, right? Have you
Perfect
thought
job
of
for him.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, oh, it's going to be tough to find someone in mainstream media who will write in defense of civil liberties and free markets. I'm confident that free markets and personal liberties are right for America. I also believe these viewpoints are underserved in the current market of ideas and news opinion. Wow. I'm excited for us together to fill that void. Jeff. Wow. Now, David Shipley was the lead editor at the Washington Post, so David Fallenflick, who works for NPR, had a scoop here. News. At an hour-long meeting with Washington Post opinion section, David Shipley said he had argued against Bezos' new vision. Shipley said he wanted a broader, pluralistic place, but Bezos sought a focused opinion report, saying that's the road to differentiation. In private, Shipley told Bezos his vision breaks the Post's brand promise of providing accountability on power, according to a person with knowledge. As NPR reported, 300,000 plus people canceled subscriptions after Bezos killed endorsement of Harris. Shipley also argued Wall Street Journal already owns the personal liberties and free markets opinion space. That's exactly word for word what Russell told me when I pitched him this story yesterday. He's like, don't they already have a paper of record that is committed to those values? That's the Wall Street Journal. Shipley has not replied to requests for comment. His arguments fell on deaf ears, as they did on Harris' endorsement. In meeting, Bezos told staff he doesn't know what it means for them. Zephyr Teachout says Bezos' definition of personal liberties is to crush dissent. Bezos' definition of free markets is monopoly, and that he takes a jab at local newspapers after having been part of the trifecta that destroyed the local news with Google and Facebook is just a gloat. This is oligarchy. Yes, absolutely. Now, we have more, but before we go further, I do want to say, because I already know what some of the feedback to this is going to be, well, the Washington Post is an establishment rag. Yes, and, you know, these establishment outlets, like the Times, like the Post, they enforce an Overton window. right? I mean, it's pretty clear. You're not going to see a Shama Sawant op-ed in the Washington Post. You're not going to see the editor-in-chief of Stormfront publish an op-ed in the Washington Post, right? They have an Overton window. They'll publish a Bernie Sanders op-ed every once in a while, and then they'll publish a more right-wing op-ed every once in a while. But these papers that have earned a reputation throughout the years as being reputational papers of record, countries have them. They're kind of unofficial, but they established that title. They are given that title because it is assumed through decades of work as a leading outlet that when they print something, you as a secondary or tertiary reporter can stand by that, right? And when they get something really wrong, it's a scandal that we remember decades later. When the New York Times said there were WMDs in Iraq, we still remember that as a major error. If the National Review had reported that 20 years ago, which I'm sure they did, nobody remembers that now because you kind of expect that slant and that bias from the National Review. So the point is, yes, these establishment outlets do enforce very strict and unfair Overton windows on conversation, but because they have the resources that they do, they can do work that other outlets simply cannot do. The Washington Post did that huge expose about the lies the IDF told about Al-Shifa Hospital, right? They were equipped to do that. You know, very few outlets have the resources available to be able to do that. So when Chomsky talks about in Manufacturing Consent, his critique of mainstream media and establishment outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times is not that you shouldn't read them. You kind of have to read them because they're the only outlets that really have the resources to get certain stories. He says you should read them with a critical eye. You have to learn to read them with a critical eye so that you get the information you need from them without being brainwashed by the perspective that they're trying to put out there. The reason I say that is because a paper of record like that, in America, there are basically 4 newspapers with reputational record that call themselves a reputational paper of record. It is the New York Times, it is the LA Times, it is the Washington Post, and then a financial paper of record would be the Wall Street Journal. So for a paper of record like that to make this direct and editorial decision about what opinions it allows in its page, in its op-ed pages, yeah, that is a big story. That is a big story because now the Washington Post editorial page is going to basically be a highbrow version of the New York Post op-ed page, right? Like you're not going to get the sort of blunt
it'll be
New
the Wall
Yorker
Street
attitude.
Journal.
Yeah,
it'll be the Wall Street
Journal. The Wall Street Journal is probably a better example, which is why David Shipley brought that up, rightfully so. I have more. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, there's no reason for a newspaper like that to exist unless you understood Jeff Bezos's purpose for owning the the Washington Post in the first place. It is to have access to Washington.
Yes.
Before, when it looked like the liberal elites were entrenched and ascendant, that was what he pitched his paper to. Democracy dies in darkness. He saw Trump obviously as an aberration, as many people did, and he figured the liberal class and their Republican adjacent allies like the Cheneys were going to wind up victorious. So he was positioning himself that way. You have to remember, when people talk about the Washington Post losing money, that's irrelevant. For example, FAO Schwarz, hugely successful store. They wound up having to give up their lease because they quadrupled the rent because FAO Schwarz actually had to make money on that space. Who moved in? Apple.
Right.
They don't need to make money on that space.
Right.
It's a cost of doing business. It's a very visible property. It's a billboard for Apple. I am sure they lose enormous amounts of money holding that space where the old FAO Schwarz used to be. That's what the Washington Post is for him. It is another lobbying tactic, owning this newspaper. So he doesn't care if all the libs are going to unsubscribe, if he's going to lose hundreds of thousands more. He's shaping the paper into something that he believes will help him gain access to the powerful in Washington as it exists in the Trump era.
Please clap.